Hello there. A very good morning and welcome to today's edition of Newsline. I'm Sonali Wanigabadage. Your usual guest, Faraz Shaukat Ali, is feeling a tad bit under the weather, but he's watching us from home. So good morning to you as well, Faraz. Today we have a very special guest in our studios this morning. He is Mr. Jeevan Tyagaraja. He is the chairman of the Center for Humanitarian Affairs. Good morning, Mr. Tyagaraja.
Good morning to you.
Thank you for joining us this early in the morning. I'd be correct in saying that you represent civil society in that you have dealt with a lot of civic issues both nationally and internationally over the past few decades.
Yes, I think I go with the latter. I worked on social issues in civil society, yes.
Right. So, yesterday, President Maithripala Sirisena said that a special cabinet paper will be presented abolishing the executive presidency, bringing in electoral reforms. He said that this will be presented now. Sri Lanka is a country that's been quite used to the executive presidency system. We're used to that system. And a lot of presidents tried to bring this in, purportedly tried to bring this in. How do you think the citizenry can deal with this transition if it does happen?
I think the backdrop is that we have three presidents have dealt with this issue. The current incumbent presidency, not just him, has been pushed by a wave from society. And I think it was primarily led by the late Soviet Terrorism, who said, look, cut back on your powers, be more accountable, come to parliament. So there was that push, I think. So he's been taken along by that push and the commitment. The antecedents of the executive presidency back then was, I think, a call for protection of all people in Sri Lanka, not just people of political parties, including minorities. So the transition will have to see something where all the people of Sri Lanka feel that they are protected. Our first post-independent constitution had such safeguards. It was taken away, I think, in '72. So, yes, we have created new institutions to protect people. It's all about really protecting people.
Are you saying that the 1978 constitution falls short of protecting the entire citizenry as a whole?
It was not intended to. But the tragic history of our last, from 78 to 2015, is that we've seen so much of war, internal strife in this country. Through war, different people have fallen between the cracks. Some have got marginalized. Political forces have marginalized people. So getting that balance, this tension will be there for a long, long time. It's an island nation with competing interests of different groups. It's really about giving space to those competing interests without unfair advantage to one or another. And that's what the executive presidency is being called upon to do. But unfettered powers, overwhelming powers, unaccountable powers should be taken out and thrown out of the window.
Do you also see that accountability or ensuring that the entire citizenry is protected is not just the responsibility of, say, the government or the state? However, it has to trickle down to civil society, other stakeholders.
No doubt about it. That's why the institutions are there. They should be doing their job. There are no excuses anymore after the recent reforms. You've got all manner of independent commissions being appointed. In theory, they can act independently. They shouldn't be acting outside their powers. But there are no more excuses to say, look, I don't have the power, I don't have the authority, somebody is pressurizing me. I don't think that's an excuse any longer. The others have to play a role. Even civil society, they can't be say we are being pressurized, we are being intimidated. That's gone. That's gone. Even the media is playing a very, very vibrant role. So yes, I agree with you. All have to play their role.
Moving overseas, another Paris attacks, over 120 people were killed. There was a great deal of public outcry regarding this. We saw a lot of media attention also being focused on this. It was indeed a very tragic and unexpected attack. Especially the activism on social media. There were hashtags saying pray for Paris. However, there was also a movement saying, why not pray for Beirut? What about prayers for Lebanon? And in Sri Lanka, while this pray for Paris hashtag was trending, there was a movement saying, well, we just went through an almost 30-year war. Nobody prayed for us, then why should we pray for Paris? So there was a lot of negativity being generated as well. However, the fact of the matter remains that international terrorism is on the rise, and this is what we need to curb. How do you see this?
It's a complex one. I'll start with your first part of your question. Yes, there was a tension saying why is Paris got global attention, which is a good thing, because I think it gives attention to all the silent voices, the bodies around the world, the killings that are going on, etc. But yes, I think just before that you had Beirut, something was going on in Kenya, and when you were asking the question, I was reminded of those girls who were abducted by Boko Haram. God only knows what's happened to them. Nobody's talking about them. There were hundreds of girls, if I remember right. So around the world, from the Africas to the Far East, unsavory things are going on. The Middle East is on fire. Part of Africa is being set on fire. Central African countries are facing the pressure, the spillover from places like Syria. And they're pretty much defenseless. Global institutions, well, need to become more relevant, I think. We need to pull back. But there was a beautiful initiative, hardly noticed. President Obama called it the countering extreme violence or something. It sounds as if you're about to launch some drone attacks. Actually not. In fact, during the course of 2015, there have been about 5 global regional consultations on how do you combat extreme violence, but not with violence. And there was a beautiful comment by the Principal Assistant Secretary in the State Department covering this subject. And she said, look, the voice of people need to be heard in the White House. I never heard that before. Fabulous comment. It is true. The leaders, whether it is President Putin, President Obama, or David Cameron, or François Hollande, or whoever it is, they need to hear the voice of people. The day you begin to hear those voices, you might understand what in heaven's name is going on. That understanding has to come on the table. We need to pull back from what we're doing right now. You're not going to bash people in by bombing literally the hell out of them. That's not going to work. And I think we need to find other ways of doing this. I think that's what's forced it on the table. I hope it goes down that path and not violence to counter violence. I hope not.
What about the developing countries?
They are at the brunt. My heart goes to, as I said, there are 4 Central African countries where Boko Haram is pulverizing them at the moment. And they are defenseless. They absolutely, because they are not the prime movers of what's going on right now.
Their crises aren't the subject of public outcry.
No, not enough. Even the people, what's happening to them, what you call masses in flight. If you look at the sum total of refugees and internal displacement is at an all-time high. Nobody talks about the number, the millions. The last time I heard it was 7 million internally displaced in Syria. People have dropped the ball on that. Nobody talks about it. Around the world, the spillover. You had migrants coming to Europe. I think that was, again, it's a bit like the visuals of the Paris attack, the visuals of my people streaming into Europe a couple of months or weeks back from Syria, etc. People are moving because of violence. And I think the world has to pull back and really find answers. This is really intolerable. If you don't find answers, you are going to see Paris, more Parises. And we don't want that.
So, measures to curb international terrorism.
On the one hand, no doubt, uncompromising. Terror is not an answer. That you can't. I think holy wars are out of the question. There are no such thing as just wars and holy wars. Wars are crimes, period. But what leads to wars? We don't need to be professors to understand that. I think we are great students. Our own country, we have learnt enough. Similarly, around the world, you need to reflect and ask, where is this coming from? And I think this particular initiative of President Obama actually looked into that. It said, let's go down and hit the ground running literally and understand what's going on here. And that is an appreciable factor. That's not a dominant voice, unfortunately, on the table. It will be the military might that speaks. But we need to find a way to bring those voices to the table and say, these are the reasons why people are... I mean, it's unthinkable that you have 7 people blowing themselves up in Paris. Can you imagine suicide bombers The presence of suicide bombers in Paris was phenomenal. I mean, you cannot even imagine this has happened. What makes a human being into a suicide bomber? How does that work? You need to understand what's the journey that took this human being into becoming a bomber. You know?
So if we as Sri Lankans are to learn a lesson from this, how can we prevent future acts of violence of this nature? How do we prevent a resurgence of separatism? Should we not then influence our education system? Should that not be changed to incorporate inclusivity?
Of course. It's a toughie. I mean, there is a call going on among some in India called Tolerant India. Yeah, I think you need to be calling for tolerant nations, which is inclusive, tolerance, which respects the promise of different constitutions. Constitutions make various promises to citizens, delivery of those promises, but at the same time, groups must not go around treading on the rights of others. It's easier said than done, because sometimes politics wants to do that, sometimes different groups wish to do that to get into politics. But one has to maintain that balance, no doubt. Violence is out of order. I think the first person stepping out of line should be dealt with, and dealt with severely right at the beginning. Violence has no place at all. Killings have no place whatsoever. But the globe is on fire.
Don't you think that the tragic part here is that the name of a religion is being misused and distorted in order to give a completely different message? And in Sri Lanka itself, all the religions preach good. How can we utilize this in order to ensure that our children of today and our children of tomorrow become citizens and adults who are more aware of their rights, of the rights of others? How can we do this? How can we bring about these concrete measures?
We spoke about the role of other sections of society previously. We have such a thing called a religious order. There's a religious order which is meant to represent different religions. While they help you with congregations and sermons and rituals, I think they need to be also part of the group that goes out there and preaches tolerance. Sacred scriptures around the world, ours included, don't talk of violence. Sacred scriptures are very inclusive. It's extremely inclusive. I think we need to be appreciating each other's sacred scriptures.
So how does this awareness come in? Should this be started at a primary level in school?
It needs to be in the education system, education within broad codes. Education is not just in the classroom, education is at home, education is in your churches.
But if parents aren't aware of, say, other religions,
yeah,
how do they inculcate those qualities in the children themselves?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's a controversial question, but it's time. Sacred scriptures of Sri Lanka are part of our religious text, teaching of religion. Just as much we went through a difficult period saying you must learn the language of the other. Now it's a question of a must, it's not an option. It's time we thought about learning the religions of the other, and that you need to have a holistic view of the spiritual texts of this country. I think that's a good idea. It may be difficult it's the easiest thing to do, honestly. Learning the religious scripts of the other is the easiest thing you can do.
And on that note, we are going for a short commercial break. We're in conversation with Mr. Jeevan Tyagaraja, the chairman of the Center for Humanitarian Affairs. We'll be right back. Hello there, welcome back to Newsline. We're in conversation with Mr. Jeevan Tyagaraja. We were talking about several issues impacting the public, as it were. Closer to home, now the fast by prison inmates with suspected LTT links, dubbed political prisoners. This fast ended. 39 prisoners have been released on conditional bail so far. For the remaining inmates, the government has taken a decision to direct most of them through a rehabilitation process. Mr. Tyagaraja, do you think that this is a successful way of going about this? This issue created quite a controversy over the past few weeks. It made local headlines. What do you think?
I would say it's the least painful path out. The recent history of this is when Mr. Mohan Peri was Attorney General a couple of years ago, the numbers were in the, if I remember right, in the 4 digits. It was 4,000 plus, somewhere above 4,500. As Attorney General, he was able to direct the law and order authorities to either proceed or drop. So he brought it down to 3 digits, I remember, and we were down to the 3 digits. So the reason I mentioned that, it is quite possible for the Attorney General to take a decision. The Attorney General's department can take a decision. Do we have material to proceed or otherwise? Either you do or you don't. If you don't, you go home. I think that decision was necessary. The fast was a result of those decisions getting dragged on. We had ample time to take position. I think these people have been there for years and years and years. Nevertheless, better late than never. Of course, the loss of time in incarceration, when you're inside for a long time, you certainly lose your vocation, you may well lose your family, you may come out with literally nothing. Who's going to pay for that? In the Indian system, in the Indian courts, there have been instances where the Indian Supreme Court has asked the state to compensate for the lost time, for the suffering that you've gone through. One could conceivably see, and I don't want to disrupt what's going on, and I notice they have volunteered to go into rehab, fine. They have volunteered to go into rehab. Can anybody say you have no right to that? That's fine. But it might be useful to look and ask, was it unreasonable for the amount of time that they spent there? Was there a justifiable reason to hold on? Did they suffer terrible losses? If so, can we help them? It would be a good, humane gesture. It's the flip side of this is that the same thing applies to torture victims. Very few are compensated for the torture they suffer. They must be compensated at all times. If they suffer torture at the hands of the state, mental suffering is torture. So if due to
and that is recognized by the Constitution.
It is recognized. So if you've been incarcerated for long periods, and that is tantamount to torture, then I think you have a liability to meet. I presume even the Human Rights Commission can play a role in these types of things, not to disrupt things, but I think to see that things are done fairly. I'm not saying wash away crimes or whitewash crimes. No. Crimes are crimes, but if you can prove it, then you can prove it. And you're free to go. But in the process, I don't think one should forget any damage done. That should be dealt with too.
Reintegration of these prisoners, these inmates, suspects, back into society following a rehabilitation program. How successful is this going to be? What can society do as a stakeholder in ensuring that this process is a smooth one? Because we need to look at this. These are human beings who have been incarcerated over a period of time, probably brainwashed during the conflict, and now they are being reintegrated into society. How can they function as normal human beings? We need to give them something, but what do we give them?
The truth is, literally all fall between the cracks. They are not counted for, they are not recognized. Mercifully, the ones who went into rehab and came out, they are generally speaking okay. There are no special provisions to take care of them as such at the moment. But it's part of the correction system that you help people going home. We don't do that in this country. Before people go home, I think one needs to prepare for the time they. So the answer to your question is, assuming they are going to, let's say, for 6 months of rehab. 6 months is not a long time. The clock starts ticking with the 6 months. You need to ask, where are they going? Who do they have to go back to? What do they have to get back to? What can we do to support them to get back to where they're coming from? It's the right thing to do. We don't have a system in place.
So the correction system falls short.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, in a different context, the correction system doesn't work simply because people are returning into incarceration for crimes, repeat offenders as they call it. That's another story altogether. But the correction system needs to be overhauled lock, stock and barrel. It is stretched to the limits, it's bursting at the seams, it houses about 4 times its intended number. But that being said, this particular case, it's not a big amount of people, it's a couple of hundreds at most, just over 100. Talking about going home now is important. And I hope, I do not know under whose care they're going to be put under, because there was a rehab authority previously, whether the same authority, I don't know. But whoever it is should be open and others should join them in doing this. Your question is extremely valid.
Are we providing sufficient psychosocial support for these prisoners? Is there a current system or mechanism to ensure that psychological support is being provided? Or do we fall short in this area as well? If so, should we bring in new reforms?
Several years ago, because I didn't want to be unfair, several years ago there was some effort to provide for therapy within courts. Psychosocial, for them, never heard of. Absolutely. Which is ridiculous. But yes, it really has to be done. People suffered. Nobody talks to them about it. It's very important to talk to them about it. And your question is, should there be an initiative? Very necessary, very definitely. Because the flip side of that is that you may come out somewhat explosively. You may be passive today, may not necessarily be passive when you come out. And God forbid, I hope not. So we need to ensure that you diffuse any latent anger as a result of what's happened to them.
President Maithripala Sirisena has said that we are a non-aligned country, that we have a non-aligned foreign policy. However, over the recent past, we've been seeing quite an alliance with the West, unlike before. What are the implications of this, and how do you see this?
We were a key member of what was called the NAM movement, I think from the late 50s. We hosted the NAM conference. Not heard of NAM for a while. I think NAM is at the moment housed somewhere in Egypt, if I'm not mistaken. But a good lesson to your question is, let's say, India's relationship, the strategic relationship India has with the United States. In some Western countries, I think Prime Minister Modi was in London recently. But in October, they hosted what is called the India-Africa Summit. 41 heads of state from Africa came. And that's a lesson of maintaining, yes, your foreign relations have to be strategic, it has to serve your purpose, no doubt about it. But it's a tough call. Yes, we've seen, what you've seen visibly is greater warming of relationships with the West, in a context maybe which it was not so warm previously. I think that's why you're seeing this. But are we losing our balance? Not necessarily so. Could we develop our relationships? Absolutely so. So whether it is ASEAN, whether it is this new TPP agreement which is in the Far East, we were looking towards Africa. Well, I hope we have a good reason to look to Africa. All of that, if you're going broadband, then it is somewhat non-aligned. You can't be broadband and be aligned. That would be difficult. So I think it's broadband equals non-aligned, but it needs to be pursued in terms of our strategic interests. So I hope that the President's comment relates to the fact that we're not taking side, but we wish to serve our interests well.
Reconciliation in Sri Lanka. It's a quite open-ended question, but several initiatives being taken, not just locally but also internationally. We had the Geneva resolution. How do we go about achieving a real and actual reconciliation in Sri Lanka?
It's a multi-track one. If I'm not mistaken, the second round of the all-party conversation took The long wars of Sri Lanka has spanned several governments and several terms of different presidents and prime ministers. It follows that different political parties bears responsibility. The political spectrum needs to reconcile and find consensus on prevention of recurrence and dealing with the past. Political spectrum has to do with that. Simultaneously, we've given undertakings, people have asked for undertakings from us, we need to be able to implement it. The whole question about the 4 pillars, about hearing what happened, deciding whether it goes for some kind of spiritual atonement, whether it goes for prosecution, or whether it continues to search for the missing, or whether you pay for the loss, that has to happen. And it has to happen fairly quickly. The small voices of people, the people who really suffered, who may not even know what to do, where to go, if they have a reason to be represented, they must be represented. If they wish to be heard, they need to be heard, and you need to support them to be heard. If they have claims which are unmet and which are justifiable, we need to help them to do that. We need to also look to see that our long wars don't return. And we have a tendency of forgetting fairly quickly, including civil society, and civil society tends to be the principal culprit of forgetfulness. So I think we need to be looking to see what are our next set of wars, next set of conflicts. We do have sufficient intelligence to understand what our next set of wars are going to be.
What are they?
Religion. In the name of religion, we can go to war.
Wrongfully?
Wrongfully. In the name of land, we will start treading on each other's toes. Water is something that we'll be fighting for. We could be, and I hope not, that we don't start going for quotas in terms of employment and jobs, etc. In an expanding world with different economic streams running, some may get better advantages over the others. We need to be worrying about our social classes, that we don't leave behind a particular class, and I am truly worried. We have left, and we continue to leave a particular class of society in the name of development. And don't do that, I would say, but they'll come at you, and justifiably so. So there are several things on the table. It doesn't mean that this is one-way traffic where the smaller groups need to be recipients of benevolence. Smaller groups need to be respectful of others as well. So you can't really be name-changing roads on the way to some religious temple or something, which I suspect is happening right now. We shouldn't do that. We need to be utterly respectful. We need to find the middle ground. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff it's not rocket science. Everything that happened in the past can return, and global trends can also influence on us.
Right, thank you very much. That was, of course, Mr. Jeevan Tyagaraja. He's the chairman of the Center for Humanitarian Affairs. And on that note, we leave you with this edition of Newsline. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you.